Chapter 1. The Smile That Didn't Belong to Me. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, the kind of sound that usually meant the start of a normal evening in our quiet cul-de-sac. I sat at the dining table, laptop open, running through a security audit report for a local tech firm. On paper, my life looked clean, steady, predictable, just the way I wanted it to. But lately, there had been cracks in the comm. Trisha's car used to pull into the driveway at exactly 5:45. She'd come through the door with that light, sing-song, "Hey, I'm home," that somehow made the air feel warmer. Now her arrivals were staggered, sometimes 6.20, sometimes nearly 8. Leo weighs with an excuse that didn't quite fit. Traffic jam, extra paperwork, dinner with an old friend from college whose name I somehow never remembered hearing before. She didn't notice the way her patterns changed, but I did. When you've spent years in the field, really in the field, where noticing the wrong kind of watched hand on a man's wrist or a shadow out of place can mean life or death, you don't just turn that off. I took a slow sip of coffee, watching the front door through the reflection in my laptop screen. The living room lights were dim, just enough for me to see without being obvious. Her key turned in the lock at 7:43. The door opened and Trisha stepped in, looking different. Not in a dramatic way. No smeared lipstick, no shirt misbuttoned. But her energy was off. Her shoulders were looser, her eyes bright but distant, as if she'd left the real version of herself somewhere else and brought home a performance. "Hey," she said, voice light. She leaned down to kiss my cheek, the faintest trace of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to her coat. It wasn't the perfume she usually wore, something more expensive, more layered. And it wasn't hers. "Hey," I said evenly, closing my laptop. "You're late." She didn't flinch. "Oh yeah, Kelly from HR wanted to go over the quarterly review numbers. You know how she gets when she's stressed." I nodded slowly, filing the name away. "Kelly. I thought Kelly's husband just had surgery," I said, keeping my tone casual, like I was only half paying attention. Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. "Right, but she's still working from the office a couple days a week." Needed to clear her head. The explanation slid off her tongue a little too smoothly. I smiled faintly and didn't push. Years ago, I learned that when someone starts building a story, the worst thing you can do is challenge it outright. Let it grow. Let it get comfortable in the open. Then pull apart piece by piece. She disappeared into the bedroom to change, humming to herself. I listened carefully to the cadence of her steps, the rustle of fabric. She took longer than usual. When she came out, her hair was pulled into a loose bun, face bare of makeup, dressed in one of my oversized sweatshirts. It was a look designed to say, "I'm relaxed, I'm home, I'm safe with you." But her phone stayed glued to her palm. We ate dinner in the soft clink of cutlery and the occasional comment about the news. I watched her thumb brush her phone screen under the table, her smile tightening each time. At one point, I said, "Something funny?" Her eyes snapped up, startled. "What?" "Oh no, just a meme Kelly sent me. About cats." She wasn't looking at a meme. She was typing. I could see the slight forward hunch of her shoulders, the pause between keystrokes. That was the posture of someone holding a conversation they wanted to protect. I murmured and went back to my plate. The rest of the evening unfolded with the same strange rhythm. Trisha cleaned the kitchen without me asking, which she almost never did unless she wanted to keep busy. She laughed at the television a little too loudly, checking her phone during every commercial break. Later, I sat in my study under the pretense of finishing work, but in reality, I was listening. The walls of this house were thin enough that, with the right angle, you could catch the faintest murmur from the living room. Yeah, no, I'll call you tomorrow." Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. The way she said tomorrow carried a softness I hadn't heard directed at me in weeks. When she finally came to bed, she rolled away from me without the usual goodnight kiss. The steady rise and fall of her breathing suggested sleep, but the tension in her shoulders told another story. The next morning, she left earlier than she needed to. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching her car disappear around the corner. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, calm, unblinking. 2 weeks passed, and the pattern solidified. More late nights, More half-formed explanations. Credit card charges at restaurants we'd never visited together. I noticed a new pair of heels in her closet, a subtle shade of burgundy, and a silk scarf tucked inside her bag that still smelled faintly of the same cologne from that first night. I told myself to let it go, to not pull on the thread. But some instincts don't die, no matter how much you want to bury them. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted. She came home at 8:05. I was sitting in the living room this time, book in hand, the lamp casting a warm pool of light over the pages. She stepped inside, phone still in her hand, and she didn't see me right away. I saw her face before she realized she was being watched. That smile, slow, private, full of something I wasn't a part of, spread across her lips. It wasn't meant for me. It wasn't even for this room, this life we'd built. It was for someone else entirely. And just like that, the air in the room changed. My pulse slowed, not from shock, but from recognition. I'd seen that smile before on people stepping out of backroom deals, on faces caught in grainy surveillance footage, on men who thought they'd gotten away with something. It was the smile of someone living a second life right under your nose. I didn't say a word. I didn't even move. But in that moment, a quiet line was drawn in my mind. Something was wrong, and whether she knew it yet or not, I was going to find out exactly what. Chapter 2, Proof in the Shadows. It started with a decision I'd made 100 times before in another life. Follow the target, stay invisible, gather evidence. The difference this time was that the target was my wife. I told myself I wasn't doing it out of jealousy. That was a comforting lie. In truth, it was instinct, the kind you develop after years in places where trust could get you killed. Friday evening, I parked my sedan 2 blocks away from Trisha's office. It was raining, the kind of steady drizzle that turns windshields into blurred watercolor paintings. I timed it, so I arrived 20 minutes before she usually left. The street was quiet except for the occasional passing bus and the sound of tires hissing through puddles. At 6:37, her silver coupe pulled away from the office parking lot. She didn't turn toward home. I let a delivery van slide between us before easing into traffic, keeping 2 cars' distance. She took Main Street west, toward the upscale district, the part of town where the restaurants have wine lists thicker than the menus. Her brake lights flared as she slowed in front of a place called the Garrison. The building's brick facade glowed under soft amber lighting, its tall windows lined with sheer curtains. Inside, I caught glimpses of suited men and women, low laughter, and crystal glasses catching the light. Trisha pulled into the lot. I didn't follow. Instead, I kept driving past, circling the block until I found a space in the alley behind the building. From there, I could watch without being seen. She stepped out of her car, wearing the burgundy heels I'd noticed in her closet last week. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She adjusted the silk scarf at her neck, the one that still carried that unfamiliar cologne, and glanced around. Then he appeared, tall, sharply dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing the rules are bendable if you have the right connections. Dominic Vaughn. I knew the name the moment I saw his face. A defense lawyer who'd made a career of skating the thin ice between legality and outright corruption. I'd read about him in news articles, always representing clients who somehow walked free despite the evidence stacked against them. Dominic leaned in close to greet her, his hand brushing her lower back. She laughed, light, easy, like she used to laugh with me years ago. They disappeared inside together. I waited 3 minutes before following on foot, moving along the narrow alley until I reached the side of the restaurant. Through a slit in the curtains, I saw them at a corner table, heads angled toward each other, a bottle of wine already open between them. I pulled a small camera from my jacket. It looked like an old key fob, unremarkable, but it could take high-resolution photos from 50 feet away. I took several shots, Trisha's hand resting on Dominic's wrist, his eyes fixed on her with the attention of a man who knew he was winning. I wasn't looking for heartbreak. I was building a case. The waiter brought them their meals, something with seared fish and greens, and they talked for nearly an hour. Dominic's gestures were deliberate, the kind of body language you use when you're selling more than an idea. I'd seen it in interrogations, in negotiations, in the quiet moments when 2 people realize they're planning something they can't say aloud. When the plates were cleared, Dominic slid a leather folder across the table. Trisha opened it, glanced inside, and then tucked something into her purse. I caught the faintest curl of her lips, that smile again. They left together just before 9. I slipped away before they reached the door, circling back to my car. From a distance, I watched them walk to hers. He leaned in, said something that made her laugh again, then stepped back as she drove off. But Dominic didn't leave. He returned to the restaurant, went through the front, and emerged minutes later with another man. This one I recognized immediately. Judge Melvin Ross. Ross's reputation was a matter of public record, long tenure, respectable rulings, but off the record, I'd heard whispers during my time consulting for federal agencies. Gambling debts, questionable real estate investments, the kind of vulnerabilities people like Dominic could exploit. They didn't notice me as they walked toward a sleek black sedan. I caught fragments of their conversation over the hum of the street. Her husband won't see it coming. Just get the papers ready. Ross will handle the rest. The rain masked my presence, the soft patter on my hood and windshield covering any sound. I raised the camera again and caught them shaking hands before getting into the sedan. I followed at a distance as they drove through the financial district, eventually pulling into the underground garage of an office tower. I didn't risk going inside, not tonight. Instead, I parked a block away and wrote everything down in a small leather notebook the way I always had. Time, locations, body language, key phrases. This wasn't just an affair. This was a coordinated move. Back home, I pour myself a drink and spread the photos on my desk. Trisha and Dominic at the table. The leather folder being passed. Ross and Dominic outside the restaurant. The handshake. The lines between them began to form in my mind like a spider's web. Dominic's smirk, Ross's vulnerabilities, Trisha's sudden interest in late nights and expensive heels. They weren't acting separately. This wasn't random. It was an orchestrated attack. By the time I shut off the light, the drink sat untouched. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. The evidence was starting to speak, and it was telling me my suspicions were no longer suspicions. They were fact. Chapter 3, The Enemy Revealed. The next week, I made my moves quietly. Trisha thought she was playing her game in the open. In truth, she'd already stepped into mine. Following Dominic Vaughn had been easy. Men like him thrived in the limelight. They liked to be seen, to shake the right hands in the right restaurants. But it was his private meetings that mattered. That's where the truth lived. Monday evening, I tailed him from his downtown office to a members-only club called the State Room, a place with velvet curtains, thick cigars, and darker deals. I didn't bother trying to get inside. I didn't need to. From the opposite building's rooftop, I had a perfect view through a partially open window. Inside, Dominic wasn't alone. Judge Melvin Ross sat opposite him at a polished mahogany table, swirling amber liquid in a glass. The conversation was muted by distance, but I'd spent enough time lip-reading in hostile territories to make out the essentials. Assets frozen, leverage in court. She'll get primary, he gets nothing, Ross will make it stick. They were discussing me. The he and nothing were mine to own. 2 nights later, confirmation came from an unexpected angle. I was sitting in my car outside Trisha's office again, just past sunset. She emerged in a navy dress I'd never seen before, hair pulled back, heels clicking against the wet pavement. She wasn't alone. Dominic was with her, carrying a slim black briefcase. They talked as they walked, and when they reached her car, she leaned against the door, laughing at something he said. He put his hand on her waist, not tentative, not testing. Familiar. That was all I needed to see. But I didn't feel the flare of rage most men might in that moment. My pulse stayed steady, my mind already mapping the battlefield. This wasn't about emotion anymore. Emotion clouded judgment, and judgment was my weapon. The next morning, I began the deeper dig. Dominic's name in my database brought up a dozen connections. Shell companies in 3 states. A real estate development deal in Miami tied to known money launderers. And a curious link, 3 joint corporate filings with Melvin Ross's brother-in-law. Ross's file painted an even clearer picture. Excessive gambling losses at a private casino in Atlantic City. Mortgage on a vacation home paid off under suspicious circumstances. Several case rulings in the past 5 years that had directly benefited Dominic's clients. It was a network, a tidy little machine where each man's weakness was the other man's leverage. And Trisha? She was the newest cog. In their plan, she'd file for divorce. Ross would preside. The division of assets would be unfavorable to me, Ross's wording, not mine. Dominic would make sure the paperwork and proceedings were airtight. By the time it was over, I'd be left with nothing but the clothes on my back and whatever I could fit in a cardboard box. I closed the files, leaned back in my chair, and let the facts settle. In another life, I might have confronted her right then, demanded answers, but that would have given her time to adjust, to hide evidence, to play the victim. No, if they wanted a war, it would be fought on my terms. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years. Jake Prince answered on the second ring. Well, if it isn't the ghost himself. Need a favor, I said. There was a pause, then a chuckle. You always do. Where and when? Same rules as before. No names in public. I'll send you the files tonight. Jake had been my spotter back in the days when jobs didn't make it to the evening news. Reliable. Lethal with a camera and an antenna. Next was Leo Vargas. He picked up with a gruff talk. Need you on recon. Civilian setting. Discreet. He grunted, which in Leo's language meant agreement. Send the details. I'll clear the week. Leo was surveillance muscle, eyes in the places nobody thought to look. The last call was the longest to make. Christian Montoya. He'd walked away from the life years before, married now, running a small vineyard in Sonoma. When he picked up, his voice was warm but wary. Martin, haven't heard that name in a while. I wouldn't be calling unless it mattered. There was a quiet sigh. I'm assuming this isn't a social visit. Not even close. I'll send a secure packet. You'll understand. Christian had been our closer, the one who could put a puzzle together faster than anyone else and anticipate the next move before it happened. I hung up and sat in the quiet for a long moment. The house was still, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. In the living room, Trisha's scarf lay draped over the back of a chair, faint traces of that expensive cologne still clinging to it. They thought they'd chosen the perfect target, someone easy to corner, a man who'd roll over to avoid the fight. They were wrong. Chapter 4, Laying the Groundwork. The morning after my calls to Jake, Leo, and Christian, I woke before dawn. The kind of morning where the air is so still you can almost hear your own heartbeat. I brewed coffee in the kitchen, staring at the steam as it rose from the mug. Across the table, my laptop glowed with a secure connection, one that didn't exist in any public record. It was time to start pulling threads. The first thread was Trisha's finances. I'd always let her handle certain household expenses. It was part of our arrangement, less time for me to deal with bills, more time for her to feel trusted. But trust is a funny thing. It doesn't evaporate in an instant. It rots quietly under the surface. Using my own back-end tracing software, I combed through the joint account logs. At first, nothing unusual, mortgage payments, utilities, groceries. Then, there they were. 2 wire transfers, each for $4,000, to an account I didn't recognize. Same bank, different branch. Same day each month. I flagged them. Next, a series of charges, expensive restaurants, boutique hotels, a jewelry store in the city. Leo within the last 90 days. None of those trips had been with me. By noon, I had enough data to send Jake. He replied with a single message. On it, expect visual confirmation within 48 hours. The second thread was Dominic's business life. He was careful, too careful. His firm's official filings were clean, public-facing accounts in order. But shell corporations leave fingerprints, even when the men behind them think they're invisible. Using a dummy IP routed through 3 countries, I accessed county records for properties in Miami, Phoenix, and a strip mall in Jersey City. The same holding company owned them all, and that holding company had Dominic's signature on its creation documents, hidden under a shell corporation with a different name. I fed this to Christian, who would map the money flow. If there was dirt, and there always is, he'd find it. The third thread was Melvin Ross. Ross was the kind of man who looked honest in a headshot, silver hair, square jaw, crisp suit. But his gambling debts were an open secret in certain circles. I called Leo. I need the judge's extracurriculars, I told him. Leo chuckled. You mean the poker tables and the baccarat pit? Exactly. Find out where he's bleeding the most and who's holding the paper. 2 days later, Leo sent me a photo of Ross at an Atlantic City private table, a whiskey glass in one hand, his tie loosened, chips stacked high in front of him. The timestamp matched a night Ross had claimed to be out of state on judicial business. The picture was gold, but I needed more than snapshots. I needed habits, patterns, proof. By the end of the week, my team was in motion. Jake's first drop came in through the secure drive. High-resolution photos of Trisha meeting Dominic in a hotel lobby. The timestamp read 7:22 p.m. The night she told me she'd been at a late board meeting. In one shot, Dominic was handing her an envelope. In another, she was sliding into her purse. I stared at those images longer than I should have. Not because they hurt, they didn't, not anymore, but because of how calm I felt looking at them. We escalated. Leo planted a tracker on Dominic's car. Jake set up a long-range mic outside Trisha's office. Christian built a money trail chart from Dominic's Miami deal straight into a campaign donation account tied to Ross's brother-in-law. By the second week, the pattern was crystal clear. Trisha had withdrawn a total of $38,000 from our accounts over the last 5 months, always in small increments, always timed with meetings with Dominic. Dominic was moving cash through 3 shell companies to pay off Ross's gambling markers at a private club. In exchange, Ross had been quietly adjusting court schedules to favor Dominic's clients and was set to preside over my divorce case when Trisha filed. I kept my face neutral at home. When Trisha breezed in one night wearing a new silk blouse, her cheeks flushed from wine, I smiled and asked how her networking dinner had gone. She launched into a rehearsed spiel about client growth and potential promotions. I listened, nodded, never once letting on that I'd already seen the security footage of her walking out of the garrison with Dominic's arm around her waist. Surveillance became routine. Leo installed a micro bug in Trisha's phone under the pretense of fixing her Bluetooth connection. Within days, I had recordings of her calls to Dominic. The judge says it's all set. He'll make sure it's quick. Martin? He's just quiet. I think he's giving up. She sounded almost relieved when she said it. Jake monitored from a safe house 2 neighborhoods away. Every evening, his encrypted messages popped up on my screen. 8:15 p.m., meet at hotel. Envelope exchange. 10:47 p.m., separate departures. Christian's reports were denser. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, nominee directors with forged passports. Each line was another nail in the coffin they'd built for themselves. By the 4th week, the web was complete. I had Ross's debts, Dominic's shell games, Trisha's theft, and enough surveillance footage to bury them all. Still, I didn't rush. Patience had kept me alive in worse situations than this. The longer I waited, the more confident they became. And the more confident they became, the sloppier they got. One night, while Trisha was in the shower, I sat in my office, headphones on, listening to a fresh recording. Dominic's voice was low but clear. Once the judge signs off, he'll be stripped bare. Assets, accounts, even the house. She'll get everything. A pause. Trisha. And after that, Dominic. After that, you'll be free. The way he said it made me wonder what kind of freedom he was promising her. It didn't matter. They'd written the ending to their story. I was just the one keeping the receipts. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence of the room sink in. On the surface, my life looked unchanged. I still went to work, still mowed the lawn on Sundays, still smiled when the neighbors waved. But beneath that calm exterior, the quiet storm was building, layer by layer, piece by piece. And when it broke, they'd never see it coming. Chapter 5, The Courtroom Trap. The courthouse smelled of old paper and stale coffee, the kind of place where lives are dismantled in neat legal paragraphs. I walked in alone. No lawyer. No briefcase. Just a man in a dark suit with steady eyes. Trisha was already seated at the petitioner's table, her posture perfect, hairstyled to project both professionalism and innocence. She wore a navy dress, the same one I'd seen her wear to dinner with Dominic weeks ago. Dominic sat beside her, leaning back in his chair with that self-satisfied grin that made juries believe him and enemies want to put him through a wall. His suit was charcoal, his tie crimson, the kind of power color choice that screamed, "I own this room." At the bench, Judge Melvin Ross adjusted his glasses, looking down at us like a man humoring a minor inconvenience before lunch. I took my seat at the respondent's table. No opening pleasantries, no smile, just a nod to the court clerk as my hands rested calmly on the polished wood. Ross cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the divorce proceedings between Tricia Monroe and Martin Monroe. Counsel, you may proceed." Dominic was on his feet before the echo faded. "Your Honor, we've prepared a fair and reasonable settlement. Given Mr. Monroe's lack of legal representation, I'd like to expedite matters so we don't waste the court's time." He turned to me, sliding a thick packet of papers across the table. "Sign it now, soldier." The last word dripped with mockery. I didn't touch the papers. Dominic continued, "Under the terms outlined, Mrs. Monroe will retain sole ownership of the marital home, full access to all joint accounts, and sole custody of their assets, given Mr. Monroe's lack of active financial contribution." Tricia smirked, glancing at the judge. "He's too scared to even speak. Look at him." The room chuckled softly, Dominic's cronies in the gallery, a few onlookers enjoying the spectacle. Ross leaned forward. "Mr. Monroe, this is a generous offer, considering your position." I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then, slowly, I leaned back in my chair. "Interesting," I said, my voice calm. "Dominic, before we proceed, tell me, does the court prefer evidence presented in physical form, or will digital projection do?" The room stilled. Ross frowned. "What exactly are you implying?" Without answering, I reached into my jacket and withdrew a slim black folder. From it, I placed 3 photographs on the table, sliding them toward the clerk. The first showed Ross in Atlantic City, whiskey in one hand, chips stacked high, time-stamped on a night he was supposedly presiding over court in another state. The second showed Dominic and Tricia in a hotel lobby, the envelope exchange caught in crystal clarity. The third was a bank statement, Tricia's signature authorizing the withdrawal of $38,000 from our joint account, the funds routed into an offshore shell company tied directly to Dominic's name. A murmur ran through the gallery. Dominic's smirk faltered. Ross shifted in his chair. "I think," I said evenly, "before we finalize anything, the court should be aware of a few irregularities." I tapped the folder. "In here, Judge, are certified copies of wire transfers covering your gambling debts, paid by an account controlled by Mr. Vaughn's firm. I also have correspondence between Mr. Vaughn and my wife discussing the strategy to strip me bare, their words, not mine. And, just for balance, I have a complete record of Mr. Vaughn's shell corporations, real estate laundering, and campaign donation kickbacks linked to your brother-in-law." Ross's face reddened. "This is highly irregular, not irregular." I cut in, my tone still polite. "Evidence. Hard, dated, cross-verified evidence. And before you consider dismissing it, you should know that copies are already in the hands of federal investigators. Today's proceedings are being recorded. The only question is whether this court continues under your authority or whether you recuse yourself to avoid obstruction charges." The room was dead silent now. Dominic's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." I allowed myself the faintest smile. "Am I?" From the back of the room, Jake shifted in his seat. No one here knew him, but I did. He was here for one reason: to confirm that every word I said could be backed up, right now, on a secure drive. Ross swallowed hard, glancing down at the papers before him. The arrogance had drained from his posture. "The court will take a brief recess." I leaned forward, my voice low but carrying. "Take all the time you need, Judge. But understand, this isn't about a divorce settlement anymore. It's about corruption, fraud, and conspiracy. And the truth has a way of surviving even the most biased courtrooms." Tricia's smirk was gone now. Her eyes flickered between Dominic and Ross, searching for the confidence they had when they walked in. It wasn't there. The bailiff announced the recess, but no one moved at first. The air in the room felt heavier, the shift in power undeniable. They thought I'd walked in defenseless. They thought I'd sign away my life to avoid a fight. They just realized I wasn't the one cornered. Chapter 6: Collapse of the Leo Lienza. When the bailiff called the court back to order, the atmosphere had changed. The buzzing whispers from the gallery were gone, replaced by a tense quiet. Judge Ross took his seat with a stiffness that made it obvious he wasn't in control anymore. His gavel came down once, but the sound was more of a token gesture than a command. Before we proceed, Ross began, his voice taut, I must address an issue brought to my attention during the recess. Dominic sat rigidly beside Tricia, his jaw locked. Tricia herself looked like she was trying to keep her composure, but her fingers were knotting and unknotting the hem of her dress under the table. Ross cleared his throat again. Given the allegations presented, and in light of potential conflicts of interest, I find it necessary to recuse myself from these proceedings effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't move. I just watched him, expression neutral, as if this were the most predictable thing in the world. This court will reassign the case to another judge, Ross continued, and all evidence pertaining to the allegations will be submitted to the appropriate authorities. His gaze darted to me for a fraction of a second, the faintest trace of resentment in his eyes. Dominic rose to his feet, slamming his palm on the table. Your Honor, Mr. Vaughn, Ross snapped, his patience fraying. You do well to remain silent. These are not matters you can talk your way out of. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively, as if sensing that things were about to turn ugly. Dominic's face flushed crimson. He leaned toward Ross, lowering his voice, but not enough to avoid the mics picking it up. We had a deal, Melvin. The judge's lips pressed into a tight line. Not anymore. That was it, the first fracture in their alliance, visible to everyone in the room. From my seat, I let my voice carry. It's remarkable how quickly loyalties shift when the light gets a little too bright. Tricia turned toward me, eyes narrowing. You think you've won something here? This isn't over, Martin. I gave her a mild smile. You're right, Trish. It's not over, but it's definitely not going the way you planned. Ross pushed back his chair and rose. Court is adjourned pending reassignment. Bailiff, please escort the parties out. The room erupted into hushed chatter as Ross exited through the side door, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His back was hunched now, no trace of the authority he had flaunted earlier. Dominic was still standing, glaring at me across the table. You think the feds scare me? He sneered. They don't have to scare you, I said calmly, rising to my feet. They just have to catch you. And, judging by the paper trail, they're already halfway there. Tricia reached for Dominic's arm, but he shook her off. You set me up, he accused, voice low but venomous. I tilted my head. You set yourself up. I just made sure people saw it. The bailiff motioned for us to move toward the doors. As we stepped into the hallway, the tension seemed to follow us. Reporters tipped off by someone, probably Jake, were already waiting. Microphones and cameras swung toward us like a school of sharks catching scent of blood. Judge Ross, is it true you've been implicated in a corruption investigation? One called out, but Ross was already disappearing down the corridor under the escort of 2 deputies. Another reporter turned to Dominic. Mr. Vaughn, how do you respond to allegations of fraud and money laundering? Dominic's lips curled into something that was meant to be a smirk, but looked more like a grimace. No comment, he barked, shoving past. Tricia tried to keep her head down, but one of the reporters caught her eye. Mrs. Monroe, did you know about your attorney's alleged crimes? Her only answer was a quickened pace toward the exit. I didn't speak to the press. I just walked through the chaos with a quiet certainty, feeling the storm I had set in motion swirl around me. Outside, the air was thick with humidity, but it carried the charged scent of change. Jake was waiting by the steps, leaning casually against the rail. You really dropped the hammer in there, he said, grinning. Not the hammer, I replied. Just the first crack. The rest will fall on its own. From across the plaza, I saw Dominic break away from Tricia, gesturing wildly as he pulled out his phone. She called after him, but he didn't look back. Whatever facade of unity they'd worn was gone, shattered in front of the cameras. Leo Vargas emerged from the side of the building, phone pressed to his ear. Federal office just confirmed they've opened formal cases on both Ross and Vaughn. Asset freezes are in play by morning. Christian Montoya joined us a moment later, slipping his sunglasses on. And guess who's now officially off the case as Tricia's attorney? He smirked. Vaughn just filed the withdrawal notice inside. Claims it's a conflict of interest. I glanced over my shoulder. Trisha was standing alone on the courthouse steps now, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The cameras had moved on to chase Ross and Dominic, but I could tell she felt the shift. The protective wall she'd built was gone. Jake followed my gaze. She's gonna come at you again, you know? I nodded. Maybe, but not with them at her back. We started down the steps, the hum of reporters and onlookers fading behind us. Think the feds will actually get them? Leo asked. They don't need to get them today, I said. Today was about taking away their safety net. The rest is inevitable. At the bottom of the steps, a black sedan pulled up. The driver leaned out the window. Mr. Monroe, agents would like to speak with you downtown regarding your evidence. I met his eyes. Tell them I'll be there. As we slid into the car, I caught one last glimpse of the courthouse in the rearview mirror. The pillars looked less imposing now, the whole building somehow smaller, like it had been stripped of its illusions. My quiet plan had been a precision strike, calculated, deliberate. Now it was a wildfire, and there was no going back. Chapter 7, Justice Served but Not Finished. The courtroom was a different place this time. No smug smiles, no whispered deals. Dominic Vaughn sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly in front of him, his designer suit looking like it had been worn through a hurricane. His once flawless hair was slightly disheveled, and the weight loss from months of custody had carved harsh lines into his face. The federal prosecutor, a compact woman with a voice like tempered steel, stood before the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is irrefutable. Fraud, racketeering, witness tampering. The defendant believed his connections put him above the law. Today, you have the opportunity to prove otherwise. Dominic's attorney, his third since the collapse of his alliance, looked exhausted. When the jury returned, the verdict came without hesitation. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a sharp-eyed man untainted by the previous scandal, read the sentence in a measured tone. 18 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Dominic didn't flinch, but I noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes darted toward the gallery, as if searching for someone. Trisha, perhaps. She wasn't there. She hadn't been to any of the hearings since the fallout. As the bailiff moved to escort him out, Dominic caught my eye. For a moment, the arrogance returned, flickering like a dying flame. You think this is the end? He muttered as he passed. I leaned just enough to reply, my voice low but clear. For you, Dominic, it's the start of a very long chapter. He was gone a moment later, swallowed by the heavy security doors. Judge Melvin Ross's downfall had been swifter and far messier. Public exposure of his gambling debts, coupled with leaked financial statements showing years of bribes, forced his resignation within weeks of Dominic's arrest. He tried to mount a defense, spinning tales about being entrapped and misunderstood. But no one bought it, not the public, not the judiciary, and certainly not the federal agents now shadowing his every move. One late evening, I got the news from Christian Montoya. We were sitting in a dim booth of a quiet bar, the kind of place where nobody cared about your business as long as you tipped well. They found Ross in his condo. Christian said, swirling the amber in his glass. Prescription pills, empty bottle of whiskey. Official word is suicide. Unofficially, he let the pause hang. I arched an eyebrow. Unstable men with powerful enemies have a way of dying without much explanation. Christian nodded slowly. It's suspicious, but no one's going to waste resources finding out. Not when the guy's reputation is already rotting in the ground. I didn't say anything more. Ross had made his bed a long time ago. Whether he decided to lie in it on his own or was shoved into it didn't change the fact that he'd never preside over another courtroom again. For Trisha, the collapse of her empire was slower, more humiliating. Without Dominic to shield her and Ross to manipulate the system, the financial house of cards she'd built came down piece by piece. Accounts were frozen. Properties she'd flaunted on social media were repossessed. Creditors called daily. The first time I saw her after the sentencing, she was standing outside a small cafe downtown. Phone pressed her ear. She didn't see me. Her voice was sharp, impatient, with that tone she used to use when a waiter didn't bring her coffee fast enough. "No, that's not acceptable," she snapped. "I need results, not excuses." A moment later, she hung up and adjusted the lapel of her coat, scanning the street like a predator looking for a weaker target. That's when I noticed a man approaching her, tall, lean, with a trench coat and the kind of calm stride that spoke of confidence. Wallace Bright. I recognized him immediately. Former law enforcement, briefly with a federal task force before transitioning into private investigation. The kind of man who could dig up your past and have it gift-wrapped in a matter of days. They shook hands, and I caught the faintest flash of relief on Trisha's face. Wallace was her new weapon, someone to find a way to fight back against me. 2 days later, I was sitting in my office when my assistant buzzed me. "Martin, there's a Mr. Wallace Bright here to see you. Says it's personal." I told her to send him in. He entered with an easy, measured step, eyes scanning the room like he was mapping every exit. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he studied me with the practiced gaze of a man who made a living reading people. "Mr. Monroe," he began, finally taking the chair opposite my desk. "I've been retained by a mutual acquaintance." I leaned back in my chair. "Trisha." His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "I don't confirm clients without consent. But yes, her. And what does she want?" He placed a slim notebook on the desk. "She believes you've overstepped. She'd like to know what skeletons you might be hiding." I studied him for a long moment before I spoke. "Careful, Wallace. Some closets are locked for a reason." He didn't flinch. "I'm not here to threaten you. I just follow the paper trails, the conversations, the habits. Everyone has a weakness." I let a slow smile spread. "That's where you're wrong. Some people have clearance." That made him pause. His brow furrowed slightly. "Clearance." I leaned forward just enough for my voice to drop into that tone, calm, deliberate, the kind that carries weight without needing volume. "You ever dig into a man's past and find whole years missing? Files sealed so deep they don't even appear in federal databases? And when you try to pull them, you get a polite call from someone who doesn't give their name." Wallace didn't answer. His eyes had gone sharp, calculating. I stood and walked to the window, keeping my back to him. "You're good at what you do. That's why you're still alive. But this isn't your hunt, Wallace. There are things you won't want to see. And if you do see them, you'll wish you could forget." Silence stretched in the room, heavy as lead. Then I heard the sound of the notebook being closed. When I turned back, Wallace was on his feet, his expression unreadable. "I think we're done here." "Wise choice," I said. He gave a short nod and left without another word. Later that evening, Jay called me. "Bright just dropped Trisha as a client," he said. No explanation. Packed up and walked away. I didn't answer right away, just let the news settle. "Guess he saw something he didn't like," Jake added. "Or," I said finally, "he saw enough to know he didn't want to keep looking." Either way, Wallace Bright was gone from her corner. And Trisha, well, she just lost her last professional ally. But something told me she wouldn't stop trying. Not yet. Chapter 8, The Last Offer. The cafe was half empty, the dull hum of conversation blending with the clink of coffee cups and the occasional hiss from the espresso machine. I had chosen the corner booth deliberately, back against the wall, clear view of both the front door and the street outside. Old habits never died. They just waited for the moment you needed them again. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Trisha walked in. She was dressed carefully, like someone trying to project stability, beige trench coat, crisp blouse, hair swept into a neat bun. But the illusion cracked the moment she caught sight of me. Her confident stride faltered, and she hesitated for a beat before moving toward the booth. "Martin," she greeted, sliding into the seat opposite me. Her voice had that guarded warmth she used to deploy when she wanted something. "Trisha." I didn't smile. "You asked for this meeting. So, say what you need to say." She took a breath, folding her hands on the table. "I'm not going to pretend things haven't been bad between us." That's an understatement. Her lips tightened, but she pressed on. "I'm not here to rehash the past. I need your help." I leaned back, studying her. "Help," I repeated. "From me." She nodded, eyes locking on mine. "Financial help. Just enough to get back on my feet. I've lost everything, Martin. The accounts, the house, everything's gone. Not everything, I said, glancing at the small diamond pendant around her neck. It was subtle, but I remembered exactly how much it had cost. Her hand went to it instinctively. This? It's nothing. Everything's something, I replied. She exhaled sharply. You think I'm just after money. Are you not? There was a pause, short but telling. I'm also asking for a chance. A reconciliation. Her voice softened, a deliberate tremor slipping in. We were good once, Martin. Before all of this. We could be again. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. That's not going to happen. The tremor in her voice vanished. Her expression hardened. So it's no then. You won't help me. Oh, I didn't say that. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. I said reconciliation is off the table, but I can offer you something else, a lifeline. One you'll only get once. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of lifeline? Relocation, I said simply. New name, new identity, new life. Far away from here. She frowned. Relocation? Like witness protection. Similar, I said, only not run by the government. I have contacts, people who can make you disappear cleanly. You'll get an entirely new identity. Papers, history, everything. You'll go somewhere remote, somewhere no one will look for you. She let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. And why would I need something like that? I held her gaze. Because Dominic's criminal associates aren't going to forget you. You were part of his inner circle, whether you meant to be or not. And when they realize you've got nothing to offer them, that's when you'll become a liability. Her eyes flickered, fear quickly masked. You don't know that. I do, I said. I've seen it happen before. The silence between us thickened. Outside, a car rolled slowly past, tires crunching over wet pavement. She glanced at the window, then back at me. What's the catch? She asked finally. I smiled faintly. There are rules. You follow them, you stay alive. You break them, you're on your own. She waited, and I counted them off on my fingers. 1. You never contact anyone from your old life. Not friends, not family, not me. 2. You don't use your old name for any reason. 3. You take the job they give you, no matter how menial it seems. 4. If anyone from your past finds you, you don't try to explain, you walk away and call the number I give you. And 5. You do not, under any circumstances, try to come back here. Her brow furrowed. That's a lot. It's survival, I said, and it's non-negotiable. She looked down at the table, her fingers drumming lightly against the wood. And where exactly would this relocation take me? Montana, I replied. Small town, remote, cold in the winter, quiet all year. People mind their own business there. She raised an eyebrow. You're sending me to the middle of nowhere. That's the point. She leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. And if I say no? I shrugged. Then you walk out that door and take your chances. Her lips parted as if to argue, but she stopped herself. For the first time in the conversation, I saw genuine hesitation. Not about leaving her old life, there was nothing left of it worth keeping, but about trusting me. I let her wrestle with it for a moment before adding, this isn't charity, Trisha. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I know what's coming, and I'd rather not have your blood on my conscience. That seemed to land. Her eyes softened, not with affection, but with reluctant understanding. And you can actually make this happen? I nodded once. Leo already have the pieces in place. Leo, the first need is your answer. She hesitated for another long beat before finally saying, Leo, right. I'll do it. I slid a plain white envelope across the table. She didn't touch it right away, but her gaze flicked to it with something close to desperation. Inside, I said, is a bus ticket, instructions, and the contact you'll meet when you arrive. Burn the instructions after you memorize them. Don't keep anything you can't carry in one bag. And leave the pendant behind. It's too traceable. Her hand went instinctively to the necklace again. It's all I have left. Then let it go, I said firmly. For a moment, I thought she'd argue. But instead, she unclasped it and set it on the table between us. Fine, but you don't get to keep it either. I slid it toward my side of the table and slipped it into my coat pocket. I'll see that it disappears. She reached for the envelope, slipping it into her bag. When do I leave? Tonight, I said. There's a 10.15 bus. You'll be on it. Her mouth tightened. And after that, I said, you stop being Trisha Monroe. You stop being anyone you've ever been. And you start over. That night, I watched from across the street as she boarded the bus. She didn't look back, not even once. By morning, Trisha would be in Montana, a nameless face in a town that didn't care who she used to be. Exactly as planned. Chapter 9, A Clean Break. The room was dark except for the soft glow of a single desk lamp. Martin sat at a large, cluttered table, the only sound the occasional hum of the city outside his window. The apartment was nondescript, nothing to hint at the life he had led before, nothing to betray the skills that had defined him. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear entirely if he wanted to. The news arrived in the form of a simple encrypted message on a secure channel. He tapped the device, opening the file with practiced precision. Subject: confirmation of compliance. Trisha Monroe/identity reassigned successfully. Location: Montana. Legal protocols observed. No deviations detected. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in the chair. A small part of him, long buried, expected a pang of something. Anger, relief, even sorrow. Instead, there was only satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement that the plan had worked perfectly. Jake, seated across the room with a laptop open and a half-empty bottle of water at his side, glanced up. She actually did it, he said, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. I know, Martin replied, voice flat but controlled. Every rule followed. No contact, no trace, no errors. Leo Vargas chuckled lightly. That's Trisha for you. Leo weighs meticulous when she wants something done, even if she hated you doing it in the first place. I don't care about meticulous, Martin said. I care about clean. That's the only measure that matters here. Christian Montantoya, leaning casually against the wall, folded his arms. And now she's someone else entirely. Montana doesn't know her name, doesn't know her face, doesn't know anything. That's as clean as it gets. Martin's gaze lingered on the screen for another moment, the glow reflecting in his eyes. Good. Let's stay that way. No regrets. Nothing left to tie her to my life or me to hers. Weeks passed. Martin adopted a new identity, something seamless yet nondescript. Adrian Kane, a man who existed on paper only where necessary, with credentials engineered to blend into any city without attracting attention. His contacts were sparse but reliable, drawn from a network that had survived decades of covert operations and quiet wars that no one else ever noticed. He had begun taking on missions again, those that aligned with a moral code he had refined over the years. Not for money, not for recognition, for justice, swift, precise, and invisible. One evening, he received a call through a secure line. The voice was clipped, professional, a familiar tone that carried authority without unnecessary words. Adrian Kane? Yes, he replied. Speaking. There's a situation in Miami. Human trafficking. Local enforcement has hit a wall. We need someone with your expertise. Discretion is paramount. He leaned back, folding his hands. Details. The voice responded, listing locations, names, routines, and timelines. By the end of the briefing, Martin already had a mental map of the operation, its weaknesses, the people involved, and where he could strike without leaving a trace. Consider it accepted, he said simply. The next morning, Adrian Kane was already on the road, a rented SUV navigating the highway toward Miami. The city skyline grew in the distance, hazy in the early sun. Traffic moved sluggishly, but to him, it was just background noise. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, predicting, planning. Jake called from secure line mid-drive. You're not even hesitating? Huh? I don't hesitate, Martin said. Not on operations. Not on mistakes I can prevent. Not on evil I can stop. That's why she never saw it coming, Jake muttered. Martin let the comment hang without acknowledgement. Thoughts of Trisha had no place in this mission. She was a chapter closed, a case solved with precision. No regrets, no distractions. By the time he reached Miami, he had surveyed the area using a combination of publicly available data, his own surveillance, and discreet informants. The trafficking network was smaller than expected but tightly controlled, insulated from local authorities by bribes and intimidation. He spent hours in the shadows, mapping entry and exit points, observing guards, watching patterns of movement. He spoke with 2 informants under assumed names, gathering final confirmations. One slip, one deviation, and it could all collapse, innocents caught in the crossfire, or worse. The sun dipped low, painting the city in warm, fiery tones. He parked a few blocks from the primary warehouse, surveying the surrounding streets. Lights flickered inside the building at irregular intervals, a signal he noted carefully. Guards changed shifts with predictable irregularity, and security cameras had blind spots that he had already logged. Adrian Kane was ready. That evening, he contacted his local ally, an agent embedded in the Miami PD who could provide limited support without compromising the operation. "Are you sure about this timing?" the agent asked. "Yes," Martin replied. "Tonight, minimal exposure, maximum leverage. We disrupt them, gather evidence, and disappear before anyone knows what hit them." The agent exhaled slowly. "Understood. You are methodical." "That's my specialty," he said, then added lightly, almost to himself, "Leo Ways has been." Later, as he crouched behind a stack of crates near the warehouse, Martin reviewed his strategy one last time. The network was vulnerable at multiple points: communications, financial transfers, and physical entry points. He could dismantle it quietly, efficiently, and leave enough evidence to ensure prosecution without endangering civilians. He reached into his jacket, retrieving a small device that could intercept communications. A few adjustments, a scan of the frequencies, and he had control over the building's internal radio chatter. Every step, every movement could be anticipated. This was not personal. This was necessary. Justice demanded precision. As night fell, the operation began. He moved like a shadow, silent, deliberate, observing and reacting without hesitation. Guards were neutralized quietly, doors unlocked, paths cleared for the authorities to arrive. Evidence was documented and secured. Digital records were copied and transmitted to secure federal servers. By the time the first wave of law enforcement arrived, the traffickers were caught off guard, unprepared for the efficiency of the strike. Martin watched from a distance, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. No accolades, no applause, just results. After the operation concluded, he returned to his temporary apartment. The streets were quiet now, the city lulled into normalcy as though nothing had happened. He sat by the window, looking out at the Miami skyline shimmering in the night. A secure message popped up on his device. "Operation successful. Evidence secured. Suspects detained." He read it, set the device aside, and poured himself a glass of water. In the quiet, he thought briefly of Montana, of Trisha, of the clean break that had allowed both of them to exist without interference, without danger, without the lingering mess of past betrayals. He felt no regret, none at all. A new identity, a new mission, a world that didn't know him, and people he could protect without compromise. The phone buzzed again. A contact, a name he didn't need to see, offering another case, one that required precision, discretion, and skill. He didn't hesitate. Adrian Kane, formerly Martin Monroe, accepted. And in that acceptance, he knew one thing for certain. The past was gone. Completely, irrevocably gone. The clean break was real. Chapter 10, The Debt Leo Ways Comes Due. The apartment was quiet, the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the space. Martin, or Adrian Kane, as he was now known, sat at the edge of the small table, staring at a tablet displaying logistics for his next assignment. Every detail had been double-checked. Transport routes, entry points, local surveillance, contingencies. Precision was everything. Then the phone rang. The tone was unremarkable, but he recognized it immediately, a number he had thought long blocked, one that should have been unreachable. He didn't answer it once. He let it ring twice, then 3 times, listening to the muted vibrations echo through the room. When he finally picked it up, the voice on the other end was tentative, softer than he remembered, almost fragile. "Martin, it's me. Trisha." His lips pressed into a thin line. The sound of her voice, familiar yet distant, didn't stir sentimentality. Not anymore. Not now. Trisha, he said evenly. You broke protocol. Yes, I know, she admitted, a shiver in her tone. I had to call. I couldn't leave things the way they were. I need to say, I'm sorry. Truly. For everything. He leaned back in his chair, studying the ceiling. She sounded genuine. There was no charm, no manipulation in her voice, only remorse, raw and unshielded. I'm listening, he said, his voice calm but firm. I betrayed you, she continued. I destroyed the life we built, and I let greed and ambition, selfishness, drive me to ruin everything. I don't expect